What's up everyone, Dylan here. I wanted to hop on to do another short and sweet analysis video, so with that said, we'll hop right into it. So, today basically closed right where yesterday opened on the S&P 500 futures. So as you can see on this daily chart, we basically gave back all the gains that we made yesterday. Okay, so yesterday S&P 500 made a new all-time high, and then today there was bearish news out of the semiconductor space, which was a major component of today's downside weakness. So more specifically, semiconductor stocks got a double whammy in the last 48 hours. First, Bloomberg revealed that U.S. officials are considering limiting the sale of AI chips outside the country. Then ASML, which is a European company, it's a semiconductor company, they missed on Q3 sales estimates, but more interesting, they actually plummeted 16% today because the company accidentally released its earnings results early due to a website malfunction. And the premature news was bleak. So I thought that was pretty interesting. You don't really see that happen too often these days, with like leaked data per se. So as a result of that semiconductor news, you had SOX, which is the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, closed down over 5%. You had Nvidia close down 4.7%, right? So there were fairly large moves in that semiconductor space, right? And if you look at ASML, you can see it came off, it closed down over 16%. And at one point, it had actually held at its previous swing low, right? Back from September 10th, it had a low. And you could see if I go to a 15-minute chart, it held this general area and bounced as much as, what is that? Bounced as much as 7% or 6.7%. And as it bounced at that previous swing low, the NASDAQ and the S&P stabilized. But then once it rolled back over, it started to weigh in on S&P and the NASDAQ. And as a result, those indices ended up heading lower from there. So ASML was the main component, but that basically spread into the semiconductor space as a whole. And basically overall, that's what weighed down the overall market. Okay, so let's look at NASDAQ because it was, like I said, it was the weaker index today. So NASDAQ has this, I guess you could call it a rising wedge, right? And I definitely want to keep an eye on this going forward. Okay, so you could see using the high from August 22nd, you attach that onto the high of September 26th, and you could see that's exactly where it fell at yesterday. Okay, got right up to that trend line and came off, and that was basically the high of the last 2 days. Okay, so if we zoom back out, you could see this is what the overall structure looks like. So going forward, if the NASDAQ gets some inflows and bounces nicely, I would definitely pay attention to that upper trend line, which has proven to be key resistance over the last 3 tests. On the downside, if NASDAQ continues to the downside over the next couple days or weeks, I would look at this downside support trend line that has held 2 or 3 different times, if you count those 2 tests right there. So going forward, I would definitely keep an eye on this rising wedge. Okay, S&P, like I said, it hit a new all-time high as of yesterday. We had that trend line that I drew for you guys last week's video and potentially the week before that, I forget, but you could see that, let's see, yep. So you could see that it did act as resistance, right? If I go to like a 6-hour chart, it acted as resistance once on August 1st, another time in late August, and then once again September 26th. And if we go to a 15-minute chart, you could see it broke above that during yesterday's open, right at the bell yesterday. Had a very, very clean break above. The bulls were clearly in control, but then because of the semiconductor space weakness today, and probably other reasons, but that was the main component. The S&P could not sustain value there on the retest. So ideally, the bulls would have liked to see that previous resistance turn into support, but that did not happen. So like I said, when ASML originally held that previous swing low, the S&P was able to kind of bounce in that general area at that trend line and sustain above it. But once ASML rolled back over and the semiconductor ETF broke lows, that's when the S&P and the NASDAQ kind of also rolled back over. And that was a clear sign in my eyes of continuation to the downside once ASML and SOX started to fade back to the downside near their early lows. Okay, so going forward, the NASDAQ, like I said, that wedge is very important, but also on the S&P, you definitely want to look at some downside areas. Okay, so these are the areas that I'm personally going to be looking at. So first off, you have the anchored VWAP from last Monday's low. Okay, and you could see here the reason I'm using that is because it has acted as support a few different times since last Monday, right? You could see like 3 different tests all got bought right at that anchored VWAP. So clearly it's proven to be an important support. On top of that, it also lines up with this previous resistance right here. So this previous resistance, right, you could see a few different upper wicks in that general area, call it 58.43, and that just so happens to line up with that anchored VWAP. So going forward, that's where I'm gonna be focused on, right? And that's what I'm gonna use to gauge overall, relative strength and weakness. If the bulls hold there, great. I would look to see if it bounces and then see if dips get above there, right? The bulls would be in control above if it holds. To the downside, if it does not, if it's unable to hold there, then I would look for areas to sell into on pops, right? So definitely use 58.43 area to monitor the relative strength and weakness of the S&P 500. Okay, going forward, on the Nasdaq, or I should say, on the S&P, we also have that key level that I've been talking about over the last month or so. All right, let me get rid of this anchored VWAP and redraw this area. So this area is very, very important, right? This has been a pivotal spot over the last, what is this, few months now, right? It was clear resistance in the past, and then it became clear support on the retest once broken above. So if 58.43 fails to hold and you start to see the S&P, have continuation to the downside, my focus would then kind of turn to that general area. And if that gets tested, that's like the line in the sand for the bulls, in my opinion, especially with how many tests it has had over the last month. Okay, so this week isn't too busy. Thursday we have jobless claims and retail sales. I'm not saying that those aren't important. They're definitely important, but this week wasn't filled with as many economic events. Okay, next week is different. Next week, this is from Zero Hedge, and you can see the week ending in October 25th, which is next week. 37% of the S&P 500 market cap reports earnings. So there's a lot of moving parts that are going to be, reporting earnings. You could have blowout earnings to the upside, blowout earnings to the downside, right? And, when you have such a large percentage of the overall S&P 500 reporting, it can potentially set up for large moves either way, okay? So having a good idea of where to look at going forward, especially into a busy week like next week, is very, very important. Okay, onto individual names. You have Apple double topping today at previous all-time highs, right? The all-time high that was made in mid-July at 237.23 got tested today. It peaked above it for 5 minutes, if that, and that was the high of the day today. So Apple has been showing relative strength relative to the other tech names, right? If you look at Apple over the last week, it's up 4.26% versus, say, QQQ, which is up 3.89%. So it has been showing relative strength versus the overall NASDAQ sector as a whole, right? So let me see, QQQE is the equal weighted QQQ, and that's up 3.81%. So it's even showing more strength than the equally weighted tech version of the NASDAQ as well. So the fact that it failed at all-time highs, despite being the stronger tech name, on the board, isn't ideal for bulls. Okay, so going forward, if that wants to take another stab at that 237.25 area, that's definitely going to be a very, very important area to watch. Okay, the bulls obviously want it to, be able to break above and sustain value over. And if you're a bear, you want it to do what it did today and continue to fail there. So, we'll see what happens on that front. Okay, but that's it for me today. That's, like I said, short and sweet. That's really what I have to the downside. Like I said, you have that anchored VWAP, which lines up with this area at 28 or 5843, and then beyond that, you have this line in the sand down there. And then for the NASDAQ to the upside, you want to look at that trend line, that the upper area of that wedge, that what is that, rising wedge. And then to the downside, if it really gets cooking to the downside, you would want to look at this lower region of the wedge too. So we'll see what happens. I'll definitely post another video probably on Monday of next week. So we'll see how much things change from now to then, and I'll talk to you then. Peace.